Oh, I have all the stuff, is it?
All right, this September 18th, 2019 meeting of the Oyster Cooperative School Board will come to order. The first activity is the approval of the agenda. I see no changes, so I wonder if I could have a motion to approve the agenda. Denise?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Moved by Denise, second. All those in favor, raise your hand. 7 in favor. Student rep in favor. The agenda is approved. Public comment? No? Approval of minutes. I have a couple small changes. Okay. On page 3, the second sentence, it should be the administration. It's the they, it's not clear who it is.
Oh, instead of they, should be the administration?
The administration has decided.
Okay.
And on page 6, I think right about the middle of the page, are you there?
Yes,
It
I am.
says, I would cut the sentence, it's how to get maximum benefit for the taxpayer. It has the ultimate same result to the taxpayer. I'm not sure we know that they both have the same impact. So if those two, I think those two sentences should just be cut.
The which one? It's how to get the maximum benefit?
It's how to get, yeah. I'd cut that
And then
right to the end of that paragraph.
after option 2, just ending the paragraph?
Yeah, and option 2, in the paragraph, option 2. Are there other changes? Okay.
I have 2. On page 2, B, board, and it,
Page 2, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
okay, so down below it goes B, board. What I was speaking about was really not vaping in the schools. I know that's a problem. What I was talking about was the added seriousness of vaping because of the medical health issue of over 500 people being hospitalized and 9 people dying from vaping things that we don't know what it is. So in addition to vaping, which we're trying to get under control, I wanted to put out a message about this added health risk to what vaping is. So that was really the
Do you have
gist
language
of
for
my
that?
comment. I don't know.
Could
We need language, though.
And then on page 6, when we're talking...
Sorry, Kenny.
Yeah.
We need language if we're going to,
Is there a change that you want in the minutes?
I'll have to write it down, but, you know, I'm sorry, I didn't write something down. I can write it and send it to you, but that was the whole point of my comment.
Okay.
And then on page 6, top of it, where we're talking about sustainability, my concern really wasn't about the hours. It really was my concern about really what Maggie's work would entail.
Understood. You did ask her, though, how many it was. So what would
Yeah.
you like to add?
Again, I'll have to bring forward language for you if you want that.
So we probably should
Okay.
table.
so I think we should table, if we got changes, without, we have to have the language to vote in minutes. So, let's see, who made the motion to approve?
I made the motion to approve.
So would you be willing to withdraw the motion?
Yes.
Who made the second? Would you withdraw the second?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can we have a motion to table?
I'll motion to table.
Moved by Denise, second by Ryan. Okay, all those in favor, raise your hand. 7 in favor. And then if you can come in with that language for the next meeting, is that right, Kenny? Okay. Good. So announcements, commendations, and comments from the district? Hearing none. Announcements, commendations, and comments from the board. Denise?
I attended the 7th and 8th grade open house last night at the middle school, and Dr. Morse did a presentation on the new middle school, which I was personally pleased at how it was very well attended. The library was packed, and I was able to attend 2 of the teams' presentations to the parents, which I found very informative. So that was the first thing I wanted to comment about. The second thing is that just a word to anyone who might be listening, that I know sometimes things are confusing, and especially at the beginning of the year, students may have lots of questions, parents may have lots of questions. I know one of the things that I heard teachers emphasize last night, and I would definitely like to reiterate, is that if you have questions, always reach out to the teachers, and they are so willing to answer. Whether it's confusion over, an assignment or how grading happens or anything like that, just reach out rather than, stew about it or students worry about different things. It's like they're always out there to help, and they want that open communication. So I just encourage parents to do that, and students.
And where did you go last night?
I'm sorry?
Where was this last night?
Oh, this was the middle school open house. Yeah, it was the 7th and 8th grade middle school open house. The 5th and 6th grade is next week.
Thank you.
Just wanted to make note that Dr. Morse's school that he formed up in Maine many years ago was just ranked number 2 in the country.
Wow.
So wanted to at least make note of it and congratulate him on something he started a long time ago that obviously a good foundation to work with. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dan?
Thanks. I'd like to ask for an item to be added to the agenda for the next meeting. I learned this week that we approved a new facility use policy in 2018, August of 2018. I learned this week that some of our practices related to that policy appear to my eye not to be compliant. So I think we have an urgent need to approve a schedule of fees as sort of a first order of business. And I'd like to have that added to next meeting's agenda so that we can talk through, as the policy requires, the board needs to approve a schedule of fees for facility use, third-party facility use. And then as part of that discussion, we can talk about going forward and some of the things that have been going on.
Okay, thank you. Others? Hearing none. Assistant Superintendent's Curriculum and Instruction Report?
Thank you. For tonight, I wanted to talk to you about the REACH program, and in order to do that, I thought I'd bring some of my friends. So I'd like to invite Suzanne Tomaszewski, our Mastway School librarian, Rachel Gazowski from Durham Parks and Rec, and Dan Hammond from the middle school to come forward. This is sort of the brain trust that makes the Summer REACH program happen every year. And I just wanted, tonight we wanted to kind of just share with you the experience this summer, share some basic facts about it, and just give you a chance to attach faces to programs. So anyway, REACH, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, stands for Recreation, Education, and Adventure Close to Home. That's where the name REACH came from. REACH is a collaborative program that connects between the Durham Parks and Rec and the Oyster River School District. It's been going on for many years. It predates my involvement in it. I think my understanding is that Danielle Bolduc at some point in the late 2008-9 range started the program, and it grew from there. The program runs Monday through Thursday with the school portion in the morning, Durham Parks and Rec in the afternoon, and then Durham Parks and Rec does a wonderful Friday field trip program every Friday. Probably the biggest thing that is important for people to understand, this is an entirely self-funded program, so the district does not pay anything for this. It's all paid through the user fees that we feel very good. We keep very manageable and affordable. Every dollar we collect goes to either providing supplies or paying an instructor or something to do with promoting the program. So every penny goes to that. Some basic facts I wanted to share with you about the program. This summer we had the record number of participants. We had 430 kids participate in somewhere around 60 camps over a 5-week period. Really great stuff. One of the big pluses of our program, and I think what separates us from other summer programs, is the instructors that are running this the large majority of them are Oyster River teachers or educators from other surrounding schools that come to it with a real expertise. And so I think from that, the experience parents and kids get is a very positive one. We also, for the last 3 years, have been running a free lunch program. This year, Doris was pleased to report we served 1,600 lunches over the course of 5 weeks this summer. That averages out to about 80 a day, clearly indicating that there's a need there and that we're able to really benefit kids. That lunch program really allows us to have a full day program because the kids can do the morning program, have lunch, and then transition nicely into the Durham Parks and Rec program. Now I'm going to turn things over to Suzanne Tomaszewski, who is one of the REACH camp coordinators. I actually would be remiss if I didn't first note that this is the first year that we've had REACH without Deb Byrne as the coordinator. Deb did it for many years, and this is the team that we worked together for the first time this year. Gives you an indication of how hard Deb worked, that we needed 2 of us to do what Deb had done as one. Oh, 3 of us, actually. So I'd like to turn over to Suzanne, who's going to talk a little bit about her experience with REACH.
I'd like to just go through a couple of pictures of samples from some of the camps. We have cake decorating. That filled up just like that, and you can see why. Joe Boucher did a clay camp, which was really popular. Fly fishing. John Silverio takes them on a trip on Thursday. There was a tie-dyeing camp. The mini treehouse, which I had to substitute in for one day. I'm very glad I'm a librarian and not a shop teacher. There were some robotics programs. There was a magical and mystical crafts where unicorn wands were made. Rocketry. And then these are some photos from the DPR program. There you go. One of the things I did like to note is that I had multiple occasions where parents approached me after their children had attended their first camp, and they said, my child had such a great time, are there any openings in next week's camp or the following? So that felt really good that, the kids were excited about it and wanted to come back for more. So, and Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good evening, I'm Dan Hammond. I was the day-to-day on-site coordinator person. For instance, you saw the tie-dye camp, and the tie-dye instructor needed hot water. And so we decided to use the microwaves, and that wasn't sufficient. And so I had to find how are we going to heat large amounts of water for her dye. So those are just some of the things that I dealt with every day. Deconflicting, it's a very, very busy building in the summertime. The janitors are trying to get their work done. There's other programs in the building. We're trying to do things, and so keeping it all as a organized chaos was kind of my job. One of the things that struck me was the kind of the handoff at lunch. It really brought all 3 programs together, because we would have a board with all the camps and each camper's name on it, and when a camper wanted to leave, I would check the name off, and the parents loved that. For some reason, I got comments from multiple parents about, oh, this is a great system. Well, some of the kids were, almost all the kids had lunch. A large portion of the lunches served were to the campers. Even those that didn't stay for the afternoon, they had lunch there before they left for home. And then there was also an indication if the student were going to be transitioned off, handed off to DPR in the afternoon. So my little board up there got a lot of praise from the parents, knowing just if their kid was leaving, if the kid was going to DPR, if the kid was absent, that sort of thing. So it was a very positive experience, and I'll transition this to Rachel from Durham Parks and Rec.
All right, good evening. I think our biggest success for the summer, or biggest highlight of the summer, would be the growth in the numbers that we had. So from last summer, we had about 95 camper registrations, and this year we had 177 camper registrations for the afternoon program. 65 of those were unique campers that participated. When I first started 5 years ago, not a single afternoon camp ran. There was that transition period. The year after that, it was, kind of a rebuilding summer. 3 out of the 5 weeks ran in the afternoon for Parks and Rec, and we averaged about 8 campers in the afternoon. And then each year it just has grown. So it's been a really good success. And just been a blast to be part of it. My kids also participate in the program, and I can say as a parent that they participate in this camp, but also a variety of other camps throughout the summer. And I will say that it was a great experience from their standpoint and also from mine as well. So looking forward to next summer already.
So we could share anecdotes all night because we did have so much fun, but we are already beginning to think about next year. One of the things that is on our plate for next year is we're hopeful that a vote will take place in March that will lead to changes taking place at the middle school, which will cause us to probably have to look for a temporary home other than the middle school for a while, and we're hopeful that that will happen. But we are already beginning to talk about how that might work and to maintain the quality of the program. One of the things that happened this summer that I just thought was, initially I thought, oh goodness, this is going to be a real stressor to have all of the ESY programs as well as REACH all happening in the same building at the same time. But it really brought it all together. Yes, there was a lot of, need to organize space and a little bit of elbow bumping here or there, but the atmosphere in the building was just great. As was noted, the custodial staff was amazing in terms of working with us, and it also, by having them all in the same place, it really supported the free lunch program, so more kids took advantage of it. So it was a really good thing. So thank you for letting us brag about the program, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I just have a comment, and I mean, the program is really incredible, and I think it's really serving a lot of kids, and it's growing, as you point out. I would be remiss, I think, to point out that Rachel is employed by the town of Durham, and the program is really, the afternoon comes from the town of Durham without any sort of differentiation between where a child resides and no extra cost where. And with Al, I know last year we approved buying a van so Rachel would be more able to transport kids, and that was part of Durham. And so maybe it's a pitch that maybe it's really time for Town of Lee, Town of Madbury, and Town of Durham to collectively work with recreation together, because this program in the afternoon part really is provided by Durham.
Yes, yeah, and thank you for saying that, Ken. One of the things that was very noteworthy by having Durham Parks and Rec on site, the transition between the two programs was seamless. Every day, the Durham Parks and Rec staff came to the cafeteria where kids were emptying out, took them and brought them to where they needed to be. It was a seamless program with, kids really having a great experience and having a lot of fun. And Rachel has been really a wonderful partner to have. We've really worked together, and I think this is the third year that we've been working together on this. Fourth year, third year?
It's that was my fourth summer.
So is this fourth? Okay, so it's fourth. It all runs together after a while. But it's been a great experience, and I think every year we figure out ways to make it work better, whether it's through Al improving our catalog so it's more user-friendly, or how we do the sign-ups and how people pay for the programs. We're looking at ways to make it, one-stop shop and convenient and all of that. So we're able to do that because it's a cooperative effort between the district and Durham Parks and Rec. So thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.
Thanks. Thank you.
Superintendent's report?
The only piece I would add tonight is Todd and Jay and Brian Cisneros and I did the Lee Fair Day, and it was really quite an amazing experience. Unlike doing a presentation like last night, we had a booth and people would stop if they were interested. Sometimes we'd rope them in, and it was really great. I think we probably talked to 60 people that day, and they're not the traditional people like last night with big parents. A lot of seniors stopped and asked questions, and so I think those opportunities are really advantageous to us getting the message out. One gentleman said that he normally votes against public projects, but it was obvious that the school did its homework and did a really nice job, and he was going to vote in favor of it. And he was actually going to reach out to neighbors who tend to vote against public projects as well and convince them that it's worth their the yes vote. So those kinds of intimate experiences really work out. And one of the things that came out of that was the possibility of reaching out to the churches in the 3 towns to see if we can do some presentations there. And then last night, one of the things that came up, which, Kenny will hit me on the head for was the fact I didn't think about, we haven't done any presentations to the middle school kids. You know, last spring they were involved in the development of it, but they haven't had a presentation on the project. So I'm going to reach out to Jay and see if we can, you know, at least show the teams where we are in the project and get that last bit of student input, because they were involved in the front end, but they haven't had any presentations. And so, you know, as you do these presentations, different issues come up, and that was one of them, and I thought, what a great idea, and I'm kicking myself in the butt that I didn't think of it before somebody mentioned it to me, so.
There is a bulletin board right outside the cafeteria entrance in the middle school with historical photos of the middle school over the years and the concepts, so
Yeah.
there is at least some exposure there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Business Administrator, the fiscal year 21 budget calculations.
Good evening. So I gave you my calculations for the year. Please don't be alarmed by that 4.25. We use 10% in health insurance. Remember last year, I think we got it down to 8, actually came in at 5.6. The contracts are right off the warrants. I just pulled those numbers in there. And remember last year, at this time, we were at 4.13, and we got it down to 3.61. So that's just some preliminary information as we start budget season, and you talk about your budget goal. Questions?
Is the 10% the guaranteed maximum, or is that just a
No,
number?
that's just a placeholder.
Okay. When do you get the,
I know they're meeting next week. They're having a public meeting.
Okay.
I'll reach out to our rep next week just to see his thoughts.
Okay.
And then I think it's before our meeting on the 31st. We will have that guaranteed maximum number. That's why we pushed it out. We
Okay.
will have it before that time. So,
okay.
Other questions?
Questions about our memo?
Okay.
Student Center report.
So I just took part of a freshman project where the freshmen got to interview people with different perspectives, and I was one of the people who got interviewed, and I thought it was a great way for them to talk to other people who have different opinions than them, so that was a cool way to talk to different people. And Spirit Week is next week, and that's a great way for all the freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors to represent their grade. And then there's a huge assembly in the end, like tradition every single year. So that's gonna be really exciting next year for everybody.
Okay. Questions? Thank you. So we move to discussion items, the hiring of the school nurse.
Yeah, I would invite Catherine Plord to the podium. So just to prep this up, what we are discovering is that our building-based nurses have no backup, and when one of them's out ill, we're relying on our current staffing, which isn't a good practice, and so I'll let Catherine take it from here.
So we started the school out year, this year with, all of our nursing staff in place. And we, as you recall, probably added a LPN position to the middle school. We've actually just been able to hire for that. So that position will be, we've had somebody come in a couple times. They had to give a notice, so they'll be coming in. But even with that, throughout the district is, when we have a staff member who is ill or a staff member who needs to get some professional development, they can't take the day. And if they do take the day, it puts us in a position to try and find coverage that we just don't have. What we used to have in the district is the resident sub position. And this was a position where we had a couple different people, one main person that we could call on to come in that day because they had a lot of availability. In the past couple years, the nurses that have done this position have other nursing jobs. And so if one of our nurses is sick the night before, and they try to get this person the next day, they've already committed to Wentworth Douglas for that next day or something like that because they're out per diem. So finding a nurse has been really challenging for backup. The other thing is we just started 2 new students in one of our programs, and it is tying up our high school staff for more time than we anticipated, and they're out of the office trying to cover the medical needs of the 2 students.
So that is causing a ripple effect in our high school nursing office. I've been reviewing visits in each nurse office each day in the middle school and high school, are seeing well over 100 kids a day. Our elementary school numbers are not as high as that, but they still have students that they're seeing for a significant amount of time during the day. They might not have as many separate hits in the system, but they might have a longer hit for a student. So I actually experienced this past week where we had one of our nurses on Friday call out sick, and she really was sick. She had a fever. She should not be in, and she could not come in. So I had to call in another nurse from another building from the high school. We had our LPN still here who could cover the building, but I needed to call in another nurse to the middle school to cover some things that I really needed the nurse to do. That had an effect on meetings she had that day. Parent meetings that were set up needed to be canceled. And at the same time, she had to come down, read all the orders, get things in order. And I actually stayed the day because I wanted them to feel supported. I wanted to make sure they had everything they needed. And so I kind of got to experience what a building goes through when one of our nurses, who knows all the students, all of the physician's orders, all the things that need to be in place for kids, is not there. When we had a regular sub years ago who was here on a regular basis, that was okay, but it's been really difficult to find that regular position from now on. So I'm feeling an immense amount of need to have a floater nurse. This position that I sent you the information about would be someone that we would start out at the high school to cover a couple things that need to be covered every day for some students, and then would be available immediately for some cross-training in every building, would spend some time with each of our school nurses getting to know the building, the procedures, the students, and then on any given day when a building is in a position where they need extra support, we would assign them there that day. I've talked with some colleagues in other districts because we've all been sort of struggling with some of the same issues in the past couple of years. And right next door in Dover, they have hired 2 floater nurses, and I believe they're looking to look for a 3rd one because they're having the same difficulties. They have found this to be much more successful and student-focused, and then the nurses can really continue to focus on what they need to do and not be stressed about what if I am not in, what does that mean? And I loved covering the nurse office, but I am not a nurse. And it was a lot of fun. At the same time, I felt, even for a sub nurse coming in, I could probably feel what they might be experiencing, making sure they're covering all the orders in the way they need to be covered.
I would also add, Catherine, that when the nurses, when there's a field trip now,
Yes.
For example, the freshman class is going on a field trip, so 200 kids essentially are leaving the building, and within that population, there are children that have to be serviced for medical reasons, which means that either the nurse has to go on the field trip, which leaves us with no nurse coverage in the building. That happens across the district. If a whole grade is growing and it happens to be a grade at the primary level that has medically fragile children or high-need children, the nurse has to go. That's the law now. And so that leaves our building unattended. And so, you know, as Catherine explained the situation to me, it felt like it was an urgent need, and that's why I brought it up for tonight.
So just a couple questions. One is Stafford Learning Center, which I know, we share like OTs and speech. Mm-hmm. Is there any talk of perhaps trying to get like nursing into the mix? And then, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they did have nursing you could contract and tap into, but again, it wasn't consistent, and a lot of the situations are coming up last minute, or even when there's a field trip and those kinds of things, those are not last minute, but getting somebody in and scheduled. It was a shared school nurse that they used to have. They don't have that type of position anymore. It was too difficult to keep staffed, and it was a position that was going in multiple directions.
Okay. And then my second question is, would it be possible to just hire maybe a half-day person to come in and do and I understand there's students that need medication or different things like that, but I'm just curious if that was considered as opposed to hiring a full-time floater, a possible half-time person.
So I did think about that for sure. But for me, it'd be sort of throwing a dart at what part of the day they would cover. I thought about even like, okay, could there be a chunk in the middle of the day? But then I still fall into if somebody's out for a full day, I don't have full day coverage for somebody. And so all of our students and their orders, I have students who have different things that need to happen all throughout the day. So that I definitely did think about that and look at kids and their programs and talk to our nurses about, this piece around, could we get away with just getting some little extra support? I also thought about another LPN position, but I don't feel comfortable, nor do our nurses, have an LPN trying to act as a school nurse without being supervised and having that supervision right there with them. Yeah.
What, if there are no absences, what would this person do?
So there would be, we have some needs at the high school that need to be met, so that person would be every day doing that to start. And I don't want to talk too much about it because I think I'll be in a position where I could break some confidentiality.
Okay.
So I want to make sure that that's covered every day because it's pulling from our nurse's office. And again, at the high school, the hits the other day were they're seeing 115 to 120 kids. So that's one person when that person's gone trying to keep that office going. So we would have that chunk of the day. There's two different kind of time periods right now, and then they would be assigned to other buildings where we have some needs that we can. They'll be busy. Like when I look at schedules, our nurses don't stop to use the bathroom. They don't eat lunch every day, and they should be. And you need to take a break. They just don't because they don't feel like they can. They don't feel like they can step away because kids come in and out all the time. You can't control when they don't feel good or when something's going on. So, and when I sat in the nurse's office, it's also a place where kids come. You could tell they were coming for that check-in. They were coming to see the nurse at the middle school. And where's Miss Passe? I just had to check in with her about this. So there's that other piece that's their adult that they're going to, and they need that adult. They still need that. That's their check-in. And I just want to make sure that we can still provide the level of service while kids feel comfortable and safe too.
Just a couple other questions. Do you have a salary range for this?
Well, when we interviewed for nurses this summer, we had a candidate that we felt would be perfect for this solution. And if that candidate accepted, once you authorize this, if you authorize this, then it would be the beginning of the scale.
Do you have a salary?
It's about 42, beginning of the scale.
I have to look at it, but it's the beginning of the teacher scale.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a job description created for this?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Job descriptions have been refined and created, and that's how we hired 2 nurses this summer. And
so their job wouldn't be any different. The school nurse job description exists. It just means that they would do it in multiple locations.
Right.
So I guess, so floater nurse is the term you've used, and I haven't heard that before. I didn't see it in the memo. That's why I just wonder, it seems like it's a unique position. Is there not a job description yet for that, or?
They would be following the exact same job description that every nurse, they just wouldn't be assigned to a building.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we did look at it because that did come up in our discussion, and all their responsibilities would be the same. It's just that some days it might be at the high school, some days it might be at Mass Way. It's the same position.
Okay.
But it's a fully qualified school nurse.
School nurse.
RN school nurse,
Yes.
not
an LPN, yeah.
And you said that you had unfilled positions, that you could shift the money from those positions to?
Yeah, right now Catherine has about a dozen.
We're down to about 7 right now.
All right, 7 unfilled positions. The last time I asked her, it was a dozen. So,
yes, it was, yeah.
So what we would do is redirect funds from there, and then Catherine and Sue would sit down, and whatever she's short, we'll go through each of the lines and make sure we've covered the cost of the position.
Mm-hmm.
Are the unfilled, are those like aid positions that you're talking about? So what do you do if you have an increase in need? What if suddenly during the rest of the year, those 7 positions are required?
So some of those positions are still required, but because we haven't hired, we were short about 15 before the start of the year. I think Denise and I were talking about this in a conversation after a board meeting. And so for the month of September, we basically have saved money on almost 15 staff. Some of the, we got hired about half of them at this point. So we still have staff that we need to hire. At the same time, I still have grant funds to allocate in the IDEA, and so there are certain things that I'll be looking at what I can shift out of my budget into the IDEA to also free up some funds. I just have to sit down and look at what would be the cost and what I can shift into the IDEA and then get grant approval from the state.
And I would say the final option, Al, is we found ourselves in trouble. We do have the special ed contingency fund, which you would release as a board tool.
What is the cost of a RN? What's the, I mean,
The beginning of the scale, we think it's
They're
about.
on the
the step
professional
one.
scale of the teachers, Al.
With benefits, yeah. Sue said
What's that, Kenny?
with benefits close to 60 is what
Okay.
Sue said.
Okay. The problem's not a new one. I mean, the problem has been something that I have personal knowledge that was a real struggle for many, many years. And a couple of years ago, I think it might have been a yellow sheet, which I brought, I supported to the board because we went and we actually hired somebody, and that person wound up going exclusively to the high school, and that particular individual didn't work out. So I'm a little confused because I thought a few years ago we were trying to address pretty much the same issue. Then what happened was that person, instead of helping out district-wide, wound up helping out just at high school. And then that person, there were personnel issues left, and I believe there's someone not with an RN degree who then took over that role at the high school. So I'm just confused of where we are in this whole discussion, and I'm uncomfortable supporting the hiring without what Dan raised, really seeing where, really laying out how this position will get utilized. You mentioned numbers, and you're right, the numbers are probably there, but then sometimes at the elementary level, those problems are incredibly time consuming.
That's what I mean, it's less
right.
hits, but the longer visits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you mentioned, lunches, bathrooms, those don't happen. So I'd really love to see in the job description too, that person is not going to be just addressing the special need at the high school, but supporting all our nurses district-wide.
And that's exactly the intent, Kenny. If you look at the memo, I talked about medically fragile children across the district. What's driving this is the number of medically fragile kids is significantly up, and so it really requires us to have someone who can come in behind all these nurses that we know these kids and have been trained to service these kids.
Right.
So the issue has evolved into one of the number of kids who absolutely require specialized care.
I agree, and I support it completely, and the need is there. But I'm wondering, as a board, I thought we created that position.
No, I don't recall that way.
Because we added...
We did. 2 years ago, we added a second nurse at the high school.
Okay.
And then, as you indicated, it didn't work out. And so coming back to the board, we decided that an LPN could support the high school nurse. And that works out fine. The LPN does a good job supporting the nurse at both now the middle school and the high school. But you know as much as anyone that an LPN can't work independently of a nurse. And so even though the LPN may very well know the children being serviced, the skill set that requires to service that child requires a nurse. And so what we're suggesting is a resurrection of that idea, but from a district perspective as opposed to a building perspective. Because when Erin was out, we have 4 medically fragile children at the middle school who require intense attention. And so we had the high school nurse taking care of PEP children in that situation. high school children in that situation and middle school kids in that situation, which meant that neither the middle school or the high school were being serviced to the level that we want them to be serviced because that one nurse was moving between the three programs. That happens in the Massway School as well as the Mohammed School, and so really what's driving this is, more than anything, the number of medically fragile children we're seeing, particularly this year, from the preschool all the way through to the high school. And that's why we really feel that a nurse is required as opposed to an LPN.
Yeah. And I agree with that assessment, exactly.
Michael?
When you talk about 115 or 120 contacts a day at the high school, is that between the nurse and the LPN, or is that just?
Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes it's more than that. So like on that Friday, the LPN saw all of those students on her own.
And out of that number, roughly what fraction is routine expected contacts and what fraction is one-off exceptional cases?
Those numbers are not within those numbers, so students who come down like just for medication, that's in a different kind of window.
So these are all?
Those are visits. Some of them are regular visits because they need that regular check-in, but most of them are, you know, again, I sit in the high school and I kind of observe for a day. They're nursing questions and nursing needs. And remember, we also have been working with our nurses around like the whole student approach around mental health as well. There's that piece that they're also assisting counseling with around doing initial assessments of folks and where they're at and connecting with counseling. So there's that other piece to it. It's not just, you know, coming down for medication, coming down because I hurt my ankle. It's also joining the team of supporting students' social emotional needs as well.
That's one out of every 8 high school students are having contact with a nurse every day.
There's a lot, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I looked at the numbers, and I was like, really? Because I thought that, yep, that's the average. Suzanne can probably speak to it.
So the issue we're running into then is if the LPN cannot work by herself.
She cannot.
She has to be, so when the RN leaves the building, she's working by herself, which is not compliant.
Which is not allowed.
It's not a good
So
practice.
that's what we're trying to fix.
We have a liability when a nurse is out that we are trying to cover here.
And in the last 5 days, we had 2 medical emergencies at the high school. So it, you know, where we needed to have the nurse at the high school.
So do we make a mistake and not just hire an RN instead of the LPN?
No, the
Kind of
buildings really
budget-
do need the LPN. In all honesty, like those LPN positions are super helpful and powerful to assist the middle school and the high school because of the sheer number of students, but we have the additional layer of some additional medically fragile students. As we keep students in program for them in district, which is really the right and best thing for those students that are here, we need to make sure we completely cover them. And at the same time, we need a nurse who can go in between buildings and step in and jump in and, you know, help a student who has diabetes, help a student who has, you know, asthma, help a student who is struggling with, you know, some other medical condition, seizure disorder. We need somebody who can go in, read the doctor's order, know what to do, and boom. And
so
with
I
this
would-
person, they would be cross-trained.
I wouldn't say it was a mistake at all, Al. I mean, again, I'll defer to Kenny, but in any health office, there's a diversification of skill set from the doctor to, you know, licensed practitioner to nurse practitioner to nurse's assistant. So I think what we're seeing is that in the school setting, that diversification is growing. And in fact, right, based on a most recent memo from the Department of Education, it almost is going to require us at some point to have a nurse practitioner on staff, and because of the requirements of Medicare that I've had a private conversation with Kenny about, because I was struggling with how to address the new regulations on Medicare, and we talked through some of that, but it's really the issue of, you know, having the right people on staff to service kids, and the LPNs at both buildings are now really very important because they free up the RNs to do the critical care needs.
Do you know the price differentiation between LPN and RN that we pay?
So
Oh,
the
it's
hourly,
significant,
yeah, it's
We're
significant.
paying
The hourly rate is.
$29
yes.
an hour for the LPNs.
So they're not salaried then?
No,
they're
they're
hourly.
hourly.
Hourly,
They're not part of any contract. They're on the non-unionized staff, and the high school, I know, because I asked Sue this when we were talking about it Friday, she's making $29 an hour.
So what does that average out to a full-time? If say your LPN is making $29 an hour and working full-time and does the full school year, what's
Teresa
the
did the
delta between the RN and the LPN?
The difference, so Teresa did the numbers, and it was below the bachelor step 1 level. That's, so we looked at this, Teresa, our Human Resources Coordinator, we looked at this to sort of look at the difference between that, and there is a difference between hiring an RN salary-wise. And
An LPN at $29 an hour for 32 hours a week for 36 weeks makes $33,408.
yeah.
And we're thinking our entry level is
42.
42, so it's a difference of 9. Yeah.
But you have the flexibility of the license.
Right. Yeah. So I understand there's this crisis. I mean, it really is a crisis, and I think it's something we incredibly should address. And but I do think the long term is really looking at, do you get much more bang for your buck by having an RN rather than the LPN? And I speak too from my experience in my medical office, and that hierarchy you refer to really exists, and it really creates incredible inefficiencies, because when you want the person who can do it all, you often don't have that person, and the person who can't do it all can't do it. And if the delta is only 9,000, we really...
Well, it's 9,000 from the beginning of the scale, Ken, so it could be, I mean, if the person was in the middle of the scale, the delta would be 30,000. It just happens that in the interview process, we know that there's a candidate who interviewed, when we interviewed for Mohammed and Massway, who could be available at the entry level. But if we were going to base it on the 2 we hired, that was a much higher salary than the base. So just the tightness of that is only because we know of a candidate, should this be approved, that, you know, Catherine would reach out to.
Yeah. I think that's so fair, and respect that, and I think I see my obligation to help us through and to approve it, but I think it probably is some good, maybe long perspective to really look at this nursing situation and really try to come up, rather than us trying to patch when we have crises, but come up with an overall game scheme. So I would support for sure hiring this person.
And I wouldn't come to you if I didn't feel, when I went to Jim, he knows, like, I problem solve, I really try and look at unique ways of supporting students, but you know, I really did go to him even before the Friday happened, and said, I feel like, because we have unintended, we have student move-ins, we have students start in our school that we don't anticipate showing up, and then they do, and then I feel as though I have a need that I just don't feel 100% comfortable with. And then our nurses, again, you know, they are running 1,000 miles a minute. You walk in any building, they are sprinters. They don't go slow.
And Catherine, I think you speak to what I think is wonderful about our district, and that we really meet the needs of special needs kids and really do it incredibly, and we keep them in district. And there's a cost to that, and this is the cost to that, and I respect that, and I think that overall mission is something I value and greatly support.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to add, I think you have tremendous credibility with the board for not asking for what you don't need. You know, we've worked with you for certainly my entire time on the board, and I think that we trust that you would not ask for this unless it was needed. So I wonder if we could have a motion.
Can I just, sorry, Dan. So, thank you. I find it very compelling, the memo. I feel the need has been very well articulated. I just think as a process issue, if we're going to be asked to approve a new position, I really feel like we have to have a job description. We need to see a budgeted amount, and I'd like to know more about where the money's going to come from. You know, I understand maybe you've got some more things to work through, but that's pretty vague. I mean, one of the responsibilities I feel I have as a board member is to be able to explain to constituents, you know, we took money out of the budget and it's not going to impact your child's education. I can't answer that question. So I think the next step is to get job description, a budgeted amount documented, and like I said, I find it very compelling. I think the need is real.
So Dan, can I ask a favor of you then? Would you support this evening with the idea that we would come back with that at the next meeting because of the issues we're facing right now?
I might. I'm a little concerned, especially with what I learned on a policy issue earlier this week, that I think we need to be a little more detailed and a little more diligent about following through with things. I don't think this is the right way to go about this. So.
And I hear you, Dan, I do, I hear all that, and at the same time, it's sort of like, there's things that are gonna come up for us sometimes, and it's not gonna be as explicit as we would like it to be, like with the yellow sheets and what's the impact, and without giving you a true, because we don't have somebody hired yet. If we had that hired, I'd have that exact number. We'd have the amount of the insurance, and then we go in and I look, where is this coming from? And we've already talked internally about areas where we can look at with some savings on some hiring we just haven't been able to do. So that is, we'll dig deeper in that, and we will bring that to you. And I want you to know, like, I also agree that needs to be a process as well. It's that sometimes there's gonna be that time when we can't be as explicit as we want to be because we have an immediate need. And I think you all have supported us so well over the years of when we have a need, sometimes we have to fix the need and then make sure we have a process moving forward.
Do we know, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do we know what the balance is in the special ed reserve fund?
Yeah.
$450-something thousand.
So that would be the worst case scenario.
That is.
To draw on that. Shoot, I had a second question, and now it's gone, so.
I just had a question. I'm still not quite clear about these unfilled positions, because will you be filling those positions? I mean, all those, will you be filling all of those?
Yeah, most of them, but we haven't been able to. So we have a savings in that within just this month. So when you start off with 15 unfilled positions, there's an estimated potential $30,000 savings right away.
Because
of benefits.
because you haven't filled them up to this point?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if you fill all of them, you'd be able to pay for it this year, but then in a future year, it would have to be added essentially as a new position, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
I just, I mean, I understand everything. I understand it's particularly the shifting of the money, but I'm going to say with what Dan is saying, that doesn't preclude coming forward with essentially a yellow sheet, which should have been done. Exactly what does this position cost, or what is the projected cost, and exactly what is the position? We don't, I mean, again, I understand the difficulty of shifting the money, but that first part can be, that could have been done, and that needs to be done when we come, because it's like, one of the board's responsibility is the fiduciary responsibility to the community, and approving a position without those is not best practice, in my opinion.
So to Kenny's point about rethinking or at least having an open mind about what the structure of the nursing support across the district is there enough time between now and the end of October to have some of that discussion as part of the budget process for next year?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I'm at a point where I'm comfortable moving forward with this from a budget perspective. Yes, we need to identify the funds, but we know that school nurses, RNs are contracted positions, and so the cost is going to be contingent on where that person fits in the collective bargaining agreement.
Yes.
So I would move to direct the superintendent to create a separate and distinct job description for the floater nurse, and upon completion of that, to authorize the hiring of that position.
Can you repeat that?
To direct the superintendent to create a separate and distinct job description for the floater school nurse, and then to authorize the hiring of that position.
So do you mean to authorize or to proceed with the
To
hiring?
go ahead and hire that position. Yeah.
Okay. Because I think we are the ones authorizing the hiring. Yeah. Okay.
with some homework of an updated job
I agree
description.
that a separate job
and some
description
numbers,
is,
yeah.
and I don't think that's a high hurdle to, for you to.
Okay.
You're saying do them concurrently, Michael, is what you're saying?
Yeah, create a new job description that is separate so that we do identify that this is a separate standalone position, not the same as a resident school nurse in a building. And that shouldn't take you more than a couple of days, and then post that position.
Okay, is this motion understood? Okay, further discussion? Well, we have a second. All right, second? Second by Brian. Further discussion?
Just, it seems as if things would really happen concurrently, because you're going to need to come back to us with the person we're going to approve for hire. Right, and then you'll come back with a job description. So really, and I support it, but really what this is saying is go ahead and start the search, but we're going to get one more crack at it.
Absolutely.
Right, so.
Okay, so we have to sign off on it. Okay. So ready to vote? All those in favor, please raise your hand. 6 in favor, the student rep in favor. All those opposed? 1 opposed. Motion passes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for. Proposed middle school bonding options, Sue? Did you give Michael who has the copies of Michael?
I have them.
Why don't you just pass those out, okay?
Sure.
Then we explain those later.
Let's see. 1, 2, 3. It's 3 pages each. 4. Oh, there might be 2 there. No, those are all.
Okay, there's 3 there. Yeah, this is 2, right? It starts with 2, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so is this,
There's 3 pages total, so there.
Looks like just 2, though.
yeah, there's only 2.
There's only 2?
There's
Yeah.
only
Oh,
2.
I'm sorry, you're right, there's 2 pages total, I'm sorry. That is complete.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got one. Tom, do you have one? Oh.
I have it here anyway. So I have my own copy. So.
Does anyone not have one? I've got 2.
I don't have one, but I brought some copies because Michael sent it to me. So I saw.
Here, Tom.
Okay, great. Okay, Sue, you want to start?
So I'll start with my memo. You asked me to just show you the option 2 and option 3 side by side with the different rates. And I just showed you the difference in interest and the total and the payment cost. I think that's what you wanted to see.
Okay. Because you did the different interest rates.
I did 3 different interest rates. Just to let you know that the original that I did was done back when we were only at 48 million. So that might be a little different because we're at 49 million right now. The other 2 were at 49. But I didn't go back and change that.
In addition to that, as you look at that, we had Jim Brzezicki do the CIP plans based on both options. So those are, if you wanted to see the impact of option 2 and 3, it's in your CIP plans as well.
Yeah, and he has the detail of what kind of things he would do based on those 2 options.
And the other information we have is what Michael just handed out. So Michael, because I met with Michael last week, and I wondered if we could get like a projection of, kind of inflation-adjusted costs, which is a tricky calculation because you have the variable of interest rates, you have the variable of the inflation, and then you have the 2 options. And so you have a lot of things flying around, and Michael was able to get it to these 2 tables. And so Michael, maybe explain what you did.
Sure. So first of all, the 2 tables are actually the same numbers. It's just that the bottom one, I rounded off to the nearest $10,000 in each box. So use whichever one you want, but you don't have to look at both. So sometimes when we're comparing costs of things, you'll see, something reflected in $1990 or $2010 or today dollars. And so what I did here is I took the repayment schedules. I used the actual repayment schedule for the 4.25, and then I made sure that the numbers worked, the math worked the same way for the other 2 because I didn't have the actual repayment schedules. But this is within a very small error of what the bond bank provided. Took the actual repayment schedules out for the next 26 years, and at different inflation rates, kind of reduced those to what they would be in 2020 dollars. So July 1st, 2020, when we would be actually issuing the bonds. And so what you see here, the big boxes in the middle where it says total bond repayment in future dollars, those are the total, what I would call the nominal cost that we're paying back. So the actual dollars that we're going to pay back if you add them up over the 26 years. And at their full dollar amount at that time.
No inflation.
No inflation, right, not inflation adjusted. And then the smaller boxes on the right side are essentially adjusted for inflation and at an inflation rate that's on the left there, 1% to 4% over the course of the life of the bond. And so the effect of this is that option 2, which is constant payments, and option 3, which is paying the same amount of principal down each year. In option 2, we pay less upfront and we pay more down the road. And so when you have zero inflation, or you have the large boxes, that creates a large difference between the two. But if we consider that the money that we're paying in the end of the bond, 20 years down the road, is not worth as much as a dollar is today, then the difference becomes less. And if inflation turns out to be higher than the interest rate on the bonds, it's actually a better deal to have put off the payments. I'm not hoping that inflation, goes up over time, but wanted to just pick a range there. So I guess my takeaway from this is if we look at something like the 2.7% box, which is where the bond bank sale in June was, and we look at, say, 2% as an inflation rate, I don't, your crystal ball is as good as mine, or better at least, the difference in current dollars between the two bonds is only $310,000. So I guess in my mind, that's not an enormous difference. So when we're talking about a total repayment of $69, $70 million, $67 million over the course of the bond.
Thank you for doing this.
If I could add, so I also appreciate you doing this, Michael. If we flip back to Susan's work in relation to the payments, you can see the distinct difference in the size of the payments, again, using the most recent bond bank at 2.7%. There's a sizable difference in option 2 payment and option 3 payment related to using the 4.25 as the starting point. And, I got an email from Brian today saying the bond bank the Feds just lowered the bond rate by another 0.25%, which is what drove actually this 2.7% happened before the 0.25% reduction the last time. And now we're down 0.5 point since that, and that's what drives these bond numbers. So I do think that between Sue's memo and Michael's memo, we get a much stronger picture of the impact of option 2 versus option 3.
Michael, do you, now looking at this, thank you very much, this is perfect. What do you feel, looking at these numbers, do you feel option 2 holds more weight now than option 3?
I guess, so based on the total cost of the bond, I think that from that perspective, there's not a large difference. And so I would lean towards option 2 because I think it gives us more budget flexibility.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. So, thank you.
I would think that option 3 could put us in real difficulty if we had a surprise. That if, for example, healthcare came in high, with option 2, we wouldn't want to do this, but you could shift some money from CIP to cover that. It would mean you'd have to slow down things in the CIP, but you'd have a little flexibility to do that. With option 3, if that happens, suppose you had $500,000 more in healthcare than you expected, the only way you could get it, I think, because you couldn't cut the CIP much more than it's already cut, you'd probably have to, have an increase of the taxes. And so, and one of the things that, I'd hope that we would be able to do is to assure voters that if they go forward with our plan, we're not going to have a spike. And I think you might have a spike if you went with option 3, if something something happen. You just have no wiggle room with option 3.
I mean, the thing, everyone keeps talking about the health insurance, but I mean, which is an expense, but I tend to look at the revenue side. You already had kind of a shot across the bow with Barrington. We had a decline in revenue coming from Barrington. At the very least, you're going to have a leveling of the Barrington revenue. You have no idea if it's going to continue to decline. So again, I think again, the explanation is really good putting it in terms of inflation in dollars, because it shows that it's not quite as great as you think in the long term, but you could have really some significant problems in the short term.
With option 3.
With option 3, yeah.
That's only for the first few years, though.
Right.
Because
I know.
remember, your
Right.
option 3 is going to decrease every year by the
It
interest
is.
that declines. So
I
that
mean,
gives
we-
you some wiggle room if health insurance goes up.
But the thing is, when we look at things, we tend to look at them in 5-year blocks, because we know with assurance past 5 years, it gets, who knows what's going to happen. But we do know that within those first 5 years, it's the most challenging, at least up front, and we have the greatest ability to predict what's going to happen.
Denise?
Yeah, I think the one advantage that I see to the option 3 is that payment goes down, as the further out in the
Right.
years you go. And again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen, but, we could potentially, 15 years out, maybe we need another building project somewhere else. And, the fact that this one, we're having, our payments are lower gives us more money if something like that does come up. And it is a gamble. I guess what I'm saying is that I recognize that option 2 is somewhat of a gamble, because you are committing to 20 years of, right, if I'm saying this right, 20 years of the same, what the same payment will be.
Most of us have chosen to take that gamble because that's how our mortgages are structured.
Plus in
That's true.
2024, 25 payment, even if you go down to 2.7, it's a $500,000 difference,
Yes,
which is a pretty good chunk of our budget.
yeah.
We could do a lot with $500,000.
It is a lot.
And especially with health insurance being the way it is, who knows what's going to happen with, the state could come in at any time and say, guess what, you're paying more for retirement, and then we're cutting more back on your aid money, so I'm leaning towards option 2, just mainly for that reason. Plus, I don't want to gut the CIP either, because we are going to have costs down the road that we're going to have to deal with regardless. Granted, a new building, expenses won't be much, but we still have 3 other buildings we have to worry about, well, 4 technically. Probably include the SAU.
I think if you look at future years, as a percentage of the budget, that amount is going to be smaller, because probably 25 years out, the budget will be probably double, even if it's 2%, goes up 2 or 3%, and this amount will be the same. So the percentage of the budget will be going down each year, and same kind of way with the mortgage. It's often the payments are harder earlier on than they are later on, because of salaries go up with inflation. Yeah.
And maybe, Brian, maybe it's what you were saying. If we look at it too from the CIP aspect, in item 3, we wind up deferring things and not following the plan laid out by Jim. Right. And item 2 allows us to stay on target, which is so important, because we do have 3 buildings and none of them are.
And it's very easy to get behind. Once you get behind, it just kind of snowballs.
Which is that's where we started out as a board, way behind because of that deferred kind of maintenance. And there will be surprises as well that come to the list. So in kind of that other aspect, that's another way maybe that 2 might look more attractive.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to option 2. I just, wanted to recognize that it is somewhat of a gamble to commit to that same amount, for the entire length of the bond, that's all. But I hear the arguments in favor of option 2, so I'm not opposed to it.
But it's also a gamble if you take 3, because you may put yourself, when you're at your most tight window,
Right, and
something can
yeah.
come up. So you're either
At
way,
the beginning, you'd
you're
be-
gambling either way. You're just trying to make the best bet
Right.
when you put your chips out.
Yeah, at the beginning, it would be, I mean, you could predict it, it obviously would be a tighter squeeze, but in some ways, it would be known, as opposed to, you don't know what's happening, 10 years out, 15 years out, or
Well,
whatever, but
basically,
anyway.
pick your poison, which one's going to...
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So I just wanted to remind the board that, so the plans you're looking at in terms of the choice you have, are, both Sue and I feel like we can make those plans work. And so, we just really need the guidance of the full board to say which plan you prefer. And, like last night, I'm not dancing through the issue of cost, but just briefly hitting it. And once you have made a decision as a body, for example, I can then pay attention to that one issue and put it right in my PowerPoint, where up to now I've just given them the aggregate cost without talking about impact, because I just didn't know where you guys were yet. So again, if you're comfortable with an option and you can get there tonight, that's great. But for my presentations, in terms of the community asking me the cost, it's super helpful if it seems like you're getting to a consensus if you can get there, because then I can just incorporate it right into the presentations and answer people's questions directly.
I had one question. If the interest rate is 2.7, and so the first bond payment is 2.865 million, would that mean we would have, because I mean, all along the plan is you have to increase the CIP 500,000, and I think next year it's 550,000. Would this mean we wouldn't have to build in that much of a CIP increase to get to this point if it's 2.7?
Yeah, I've been anticipating that the payment would be about 3.7 million, and then the freed up 700,000. That's where we get to the 4.1 approximately. I'm just being very roundish in my presentation. And so to get there is how Sue and I carved the path of the $500,000 increments in CIP. So if it came in at 2.7 and we used option 2, it does have an impact on how much we have to put in CIP each year. It lowers it.
Okay. So are we ready to vote on this? People ready?
We need a motion, right?
I know, so.
I'll move to adopt the level debt, option 2 bond scenario.
Moved by Michael, is there a second? By Dan? Further discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. 7 in favor, the student rep in favor. Big decision. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Michael. It's actually very helpful.
So the budget goal, we've already talked about that, right?
So
So-
there's one thing, I just think we need to take out the Barrington, new money, because it's really not new money anymore. I don't know, I feel like it's misleading to say, I can't find it right now even, but, the line about Barrington with new money, I think we should just take it out completely. Yeah, this new revenue from Barrington tuition agreement, it's part of our budget now, so I just would like to see that just taken out completely.
So what if, hypothetically, what if you'd have 50 students from Barrington come in? You would have more money.
Yeah, but I don't think we need to state it as our goal. I think it's misleading now. It made sense at the beginning, but to me, I feel like it's kind of misleading now. I just would prefer to just take that line out.
And, quite frankly, when Sue and I have been discussing the budget to present to all of you, we were going to flat fund Barrington revenue, as Al had alluded to earlier. I think that I don't expect that we'll see a decrease, but I don't expect we'll see an increase either. And I think that level funding it is the most prudent direction we have. So even if we did get extra revenue from Barrington, it would just become part of our undesignated balance at the end of the year, which, you as a board decide on how to expend. So I think Denise's recommendation is a good one. You agree, Sue? Yeah, okay.
Okay. So, and you have a sense of, like, how obviously, if health comes in lower, that can bring that 4.25 where it is now down closer to this. Are there other methods to bring it down? Because I don't think that would do it.
Sure, no. So, what Sue and I do every budget season is, each principal and director presents us with a budget that they think will meet their needs, and then Sue and I go through that. And invariably, the budget that's presented to Sue and I does not become the budget that is presented to you, because we've worked with the principals and directors to lower their requests. And then the other piece, of course, is, what will come through on the yellow sheets are never incorporated into the budget, and that's a decision that those personnel decisions are made by the board and not by administration. So, the administration has already been put on record, as they were last year and the year before, that, our primary goal coming to this budget season is to make sure that we can fund a new middle school if it's approved. And so we, are going by the mindset that we're hoping it will be approved. And, when we give you a 3.5% goal, we think we can achieve that. But it takes a lot of cooperation by all the administrators in terms of making tough decisions before they get here. But you also get to see what we've cut, because we gave that to you last year as well. I think we cut like $800,000 before it got to your level, and then you guys make other decisions.
Well,
So can we say the budget goal is the net increase in the general fund will be 3.5% or less? Because you're assuming you're taking our expenses and you're using revenue to offset our expenses to reach the 3.5%.
Net of revenue.
The net, so you're using revenue to offset your expenses, and so the net increase in the general fund is 3.5%. Is that what you're saying?
Right. But what Al said, if there was, we would use it to offset.
Well, I mean, again, like the expenses in your memo, which you put out, it's like you're anticipating that it potentially is and last year it's going to be over 3.5%. Your expenses will be, right?
No, we're thinking that our revenue and the increased cost will come out at a 3.5% impact. That was the language we used. I agree with that. But we don't see in this upcoming year, well, this is a good time as any to bring it up. So Catherine, get ready. So we have the Barrington thing, and we've got that figured out, flat fund it. Right now, we're working across the state with the Department of Human Services and the Department of Education on some pretty draconian direction from both of those departments related to Medicare funds. And traditionally, the school service providers have been able to recommend services that children need. This latest emergency rule from the department is that we now will have to have medical professionals sign off on those services. So when you get to, for example, psychological services, there are literally 3 psychiatrists who can sign off. They're all in Hanover. So we actually see that Medicare funding in the area of psychiatry, psychological services is likely to go down. Fortunately, that's not the largest share of our Medicare, but the direction right now in this emergency rule is that we would have to have somebody of Kenny's caliber, a medical doctor, now sign off on IEPs, which historically the department has allowed school personnel to do. We think we have a workaround, but I will tell you right now, Al, that it's a moving target, and everybody in the state is in a total panic over this new emergency rule. But Catherine and I and Sue have thought about how we could work around this rule, and we think we have a solution. The reason I'm not talking about it in detail is because we're still fighting the emergency rule, which just came out Friday.
I get all that. I'm just, what do you mean by impact? And we've said this like,
less revenue.
I mean, in other words, like if I look at fiscal 1920, the general fund, and I look at what you're saying the fiscal 2021 general fund is, are you saying the difference in those is 3.5%?
The 3.5% increase in general fund.
So then that's what we should make the goal. It's like, I hate this, I hate the overall impact. It's such a squishy thing. What exactly are we trying to accomplish is what the goal should say.
So the voted allocation from last year was $47,446,888.
So you're saying it'll be 3.5% higher than that?
That's the way I interpreted it.
Is that the understanding?
Is that the total budget or is that the general fund?
That's the total, including the bargaining agreement.
That's not including food service and federal funds.
Fund 10?
No, it includes it all. It's what was on the warrant.
Right, that's not the number we're talking.
Okay, so I agree with Al then, because I
So
don't
you're
know what
talking
number
about
is
the
either.
whole thing, you're taking all the revenue that you're coming in.
Come on,
Let me
come
like
stand.
explain, help me with this.
We're going back to just the general fund is what you're saying, because we don't really anticipate any extra revenues.
Right.
So we'd go back to the general fund, which I think is around 44, I don't have it in front of me, I just did that calculation, 44,980 or something like that. And the new general fund budget wouldn't be more than 3.5 over that.
Yeah,
Not
I'm
considering
trying to go back to that, you know that map that you have that they always give us with all the colors?
With all the colors, yeah.
Right,
yeah.
so that's, in other words, you're saying, and again, was that?
Michael's taking that number on the bottom, which includes
Right,
everything.
I'm going Fund 10 without any of the offsets.
Right.
Are you saying that Fund 10 will be 3.5% higher in fiscal 2021 than in 1920?
Well, is that what you want to say? Yes, that's what I would say.
is that what this means?
Including negotiated agreements?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't want to include.
So that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Right.
So I think that's what we should say.
So every year we put this out. It's language that you all come to, and so each year we have adjusted it based on the conversations we have, which is why I give you last year's with the strikeouts. So, if that's what it needs to be for clarity, then, you're speaking the same language.
No, I know, I'm just trying to, because it's like, you understand, like, overall impact is so squishy.
Right.
What exactly are we trying, what exactly is?
If you want to be specific, Fund 10 to Fund 10 will not be more than 3.5.
Perfect.
That's specific.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the MS 22. So food service and other special revenue is what's not included in Fund
Right.
10? Okay,
So subtract those two.
right.
Correct. So you can say it exactly.
So it'll be so much easier next year, because it'll be so specific.
But it's not just Fund 10 to Fund 10, because that won't include, but we're going to include.
We'll include that.
We're going to
That's
include
what I-
projected bond payment, and we're going to include
Yeah. That's still Fund 10.
projected
That's
collective
still Fund
bargaining.
10.
Okay, even though
That's
it's not
still
in
Fund
the
10.
warrant. Okay,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, it is.
Do you want to change the last line?
I do, and again, a year from now, and everyone tells me I was wrong, we'll struggle with it again, but I just think it's so much clearer to say it like that than say the overall impact. People can then go specifically and look at fiscal 1920 Fund 10, see exactly what it was, and they can see what we're proposing.
Al, what do you want that last line to say?
So the last line
Can you
is.
make a motion?
I'll make a motion. So the last line should be that the increase in Fund 10 for the 2021 proposed budget will be an increase, let me go back there. The increase of the 2021 Fund 10 will, over the fiscal 1920 will be 3.5% or less.
Over the fiscal
1920.
will be 3.5 or less.
Yes.
Could you just maybe read that one more time?
Al Holland moved that the last line, increase in Fund 10 over fiscal 1920.
2021 will be, the increase of fiscal 2021 Fund 10 over the fiscal 1920 will be 3.5% or less.
Okay. We all have that?
Got it.
So we're striking the Barrington sentence, right?
Striking. Do you, I mean, when making these as motions to this?
So should we include that in the motion?
I'll take it as a friendly amendment.
Okay, to strike the Barrington, yeah.
Okay, so you're making the motion now, is that right? Okay, and that includes the striking of the Barrington sentence. Do I have a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, Denise? Further discussion on this?
So,
Hearing none?
okay. So 3.5% of Fund 10 is $1.6 million.
How much?
1.6, a little over 1.6. Our projected local tax revenue to be raised this year was $32.5 million, or in fiscal year 20, the current school year, $32.5 million. So if we have to find all of that increase of $1.6 million in local tax revenue, that's an increase of 4.9% in local school tax. So that feels like a lot more than 3.5% when we cut it that way.
Right.
And I wonder if we're already at a point where we need to start dialing back the increase in the CIP to provide some relief there.
So you'll have that opportunity when we present the draft budget, and you can have that conversation about where, where your comfort level is. I think we start with the plan, and then you all work your way through the proposed budget, and at the other end of it, it's your budget to, that we present to the community. So I think that conversation happens in October, because you don't have a proposed budget to work from. You don't know what other areas you might want to cut or add to.
I'd like to start with the target of less than 3.5%.
I can't meet the capital plan without it, because you have a $600,000 increase in your negotiated agreement, $500,000 on capital, and then health insurance, we don't know, so that's the variable coming in. And when you get to a place where you set a goal that's less, you're going to impact some things that don't impact students, but then you're going to get right into a place where you're impacting students, which means staffing, because that's where 80% of our budget is.
I had a question about staffing. With the decline in the elementary school population, is there a possibility of having fewer teachers, say, in the early grades, because you're going from 80 in some classes to 30? I mean, you're...
Yep. So there's always that possibility, and, I'll be working with the elementary principals to look at the last couple of years of kindergarten enrollment and the exiting fourth grades, because that's where that differential will be. We haven't had that conversation yet.
Okay.
Can I follow up with you, Michael? Because again, I was just trying to clarify the language. So if you're saying you don't like, what is your alternative to what I have just proposed?
Well, I think if we go with a target of 3%, that's still a 4.2% increase in what we need to raise locally. So I think we need to be closer to that. I would suggest 3%.
Denise?
It's always so crazy with the tax rate, and then we get the tax rate, and it's always so different than what we thought it was going to be anyway. So I would like to start, for the purpose of beginning the discussion, with the 3.5, so we can actually see what's cut. Because if we start at 3, we won't see what's cut. I'd like to start at 3.5 And then we can kind of work from there and look at, where we want to make cuts or what have you.
Do you view yellow sheets recommended by the administration as being within that 3.5%?
No, those are all. Any time a new position is proposed, I do not include it in the budget because I think that yellow sheet should be addressed here rather than at my level. Goes back to a conversation that Tom and I had way back when he assumed the chairpersonship, and part of that philosophy was the board should see what it is that's being proposed, and new positions should be addressed here, not by the superintendent. And so that's why the yellow sheets were created. So if there's a position that needs to be there, and whatever ceiling you have, the issue is if we create that, can we get it inside that ceiling, whether it's 3% or 3.5%? And that's part of the budget discussion as well.
So when we made this goal, as you said, Sue, we've included essentially the negotiated agreements are going in the Fund 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the goal of the negotiated agreements was 3%. So in order to meet an overall 3% goal, the rest would have to come in would have to be lower, right?
Correct.
Well, no, if everything was 3%, then you'd be okay.
Okay, I mean, yeah.
Because it's 3% of 2/3 of the budget or whatever.
So, but the point being, then if you go with the 3%, you already have 3% negotiated agreements, you can't increase the CIP, right?
Right. It's going to be.
Hasn't come in at 3 for years. Yeah.
So we have a couple things. We have CIP and we have health insurance that routinely exceed that.
Right.
So which leaves very little room for other operating expenses to grow.
That's exactly right.
So you need to figure, sort of see what decision we need to make tonight. Do you need a goal, do we need to decide this tonight for you to move forward with the?
No. This is usually what we do is exactly what we're doing. We put the draft in front of all of you. You guys react to it. It's another one of those issues we sort of treat like we do policy. So you see it tonight. You're providing Sue and I feedback. We'll come back to it in 2 weeks, and we'll lock and load because we'll be in October at that point, and we need to know what our goal is.
But we have a motion. We have a motion on the table that was motioned and second, so we need to vote on that.
Yeah.
And the motion was to accept the 3.5, strike the Barrington sentence. That's the motion that's on the table right now.
Well, again, if people aren't comfortable with it, I'm more than willing to table the motion. But my point was I was just trying to clarify exactly what our goal is. What Michael is saying is a different thing. Is that a realistic goal? Again.
One question I have, I don't mean maybe muddy the water, but I may be doing that, is if you had a buyout at some point, a bigger buyout for teachers, so you could hire, so teachers retired at the top and we're bringing teachers at the bottom, even with the $20,000 stipend, that could also reduce the, bring that 3.5 down. That would be a tool you might have, right?
It is a tool, but it's also a tool that we should be using intermittently. I'm thinking, when we get to the place where we're down the road, closer to the time the bond is due, that would be a logical thing for us to use as a tool to try to lower overall personnel costs so that we don't, so we can afford the bond. So, I'm thinking
timing,
more timing is more important on that more than ever. So I was thinking probably 3 years down the road, we would approach that with the guild, do a survey and see what the interest is.
Okay.
I'm kind of picking up from what Dr. Moore said about this is kind of the first crack at it and wanting to get feedback. I think the feedback that Denise, you gave about pulling that clause is really important. I think the feedback Al, you gave about really defining its, whatever percentage, its percentage of what. And maybe it might be good for us to maybe pull back motion at this point and let Dr. Morse then recraft it with those, for sure, those two suggestions, and then taking into account our conversation about what percentage, and moving forward from that. That might be a good way to proceed.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Kenny. I just want to remind the board that as we talked about the middle school plan, we put out a memo, I think it was last May, and this is in line with that concept of $500,000 a year. The work that Michael did tonight in relation to the interest and the bond payment does have an impact on that. And it's really a part of that scenario is, where do you think, what's your best guess predicting based on, the fact that the bond bank went out at 2.7%, $500,000 is based on 4.25%. So, I mean, that's part of the thought process that you have to incorporate in the goal. So, if the bond came in at 2.7, then we don't need 500, we probably need 300 or 350. That makes a big difference in the budget goal. Unfortunately, we don't know that, so it comes back to some of the words that we heard tonight around other issues around, gambling to a certain degree. And Sue and I put out the 4.25 because that's the most conservative position we could take. But maybe the truth is someplace between 2.7 and 4.25, and thus has an impact on the overall budget goal that you establish.
I don't think that's going to have a big impact on next year because we're only paying 7 months of interest on half of the bond next year.
True.
And it's only interest.
So my sense is people are okay to wait a meeting and make a decision on it next meeting, is that?
So why don't I table my motion?
Okay.
Till the next meeting.
I'm sorry.
Till the next meeting.
Yeah.
So do we need to vote on tabling? Is that,
Whoever seconded, I can't remember what the Robert's rule is on.
I second the motion.
Well, when in doubt, vote.
Yeah.
okay. So I don't exactly know the Robert's Rules of Order, but I think we just need to vote on tabling it and bringing it up at the next meeting, probably for a decision, okay? So you make...
I table it, she seconded it, so we
You
can
second
vote on
it?
it.
Is there a second to the table?
I'll second for the table. It's fine.
Okay. All in favor of tabling, raise your hand. 7 in favor, the student rep in favor. Okay, that is tabled. Okay, you also have a draft of resolution. I think that's where we are, right? New Hampshire School Board resolution, we put one forward last year, was defeated. And I have a copy of what we did last year, so I can pass that around. I'm not sure I have enough copies. You might just have to share it, Lisa. And in your backup, I had the another version that I'm proposing for this year.
You want to give that down?
So, there should be like a proposal and then rationale similar to the format. The difference between the two is last year I went into kind of a detail, almost a legal, following Gordon Graham's, memo, which is far more detailed than other resolutions, and as the discussion proceeded, it was pretty clear that, Gordon says that it's ambiguous what the status of it is, but it seemed pretty clear from the discussions I heard that it's not that ambiguous. Basically, districts cannot preclude people who legally own a firearm from bringing it onto school property, period. It's pretty much defined right that they could do that. And the other thing that happened was it got hung up on whether it should be a local decision or a state decision. We wrote it specifically as a local decision in our resolution, and then the leadership in the New Hampshire School Boards Association says, well, that could create confusion, you know. And so what I tried to write at this time is a more general statement, you know, that could apply to a statewide ban or could apply to a local ban. And then I didn't give as much explanation as I did last time, but just maybe the gist of why we're doing it. And then I'd obviously give more explanation when I presented it, but not to go into great detail, because I was starting to get into things like, you know, is it really a Second Amendment issue? And I thought, I don't want to get into that kind of stuff here, just the basics of what we're proposing. So I don't know how people feel about the difference between the two, but this one could apply to a statewide ban if that's the way the legislature went. And it went back and forth last year, you know. So, you know, there was support for both versions, but this would support either version, I think. So I don't know how people feel about it, whether they want, you know, whether they like last year's better, whether I should do more with it, but I'd like to get this moving so we can bring on other school boards, yeah?
You have in here, under current law, anyone who legally owns a gun can bring.
Sorry?
You have here in the new proposed one, under current law, anyone who legally owns a gun can bring that weapon into school grounds and into schools.
Yeah.
I don't think that's entirely correct, because it reverts to federal law. And federal law, so anyone who's duly licensed. So actually, if you have a permit in the state, that's the one who can carry, it is the one who can carry a gun.
They don't have permits.
Yes, they do have permits in the state, they still do. You can still get a permit to conceal. I have one.
I know, but
You can still, because there are certain reciprocal laws, but the federal law states as long as you are duly licensed in your state, you can actually carry a gun into a school, legally.
But because we're an open carry state,
You're not required.
You're not required to have it, but
therefore you're duly licensed to open carry.
no,
Not
it's
under
not
the
correct.
federal law.
Not in federal law.
Yeah.
But
They reverse the
the
federal law.
federal law, by our New Hampshire Attorney General's position, the state of New Hampshire will not enforce the federal law.
Actually, according to Attorney General, it won't enforce any firearm law on a school property, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the heart of
Because
the
then
issue.
you say, if there's an issue, you call federal marshal.
That's what he said.
Yeah, which would revert to federal law.
So is the remedy there just to insert the word state between current and law? So it says under current state law, anyone who, and so on? Or does that muddy the waters?
I just think we should be a little more exact on how this is.
I thought state, but...
So put in state with that?
Is that, what do you think
So,
needs to happen?
Tom, the statement that you've written...
Under
is
current
this-
New Hampshire law or something along that line?
Do you want
Is
to
this
say the
something
state
you would
mirrors
present
federal law?
at this?
Yeah,
school
I
board?
would present it.
State doesn't.
And you would just read your statement?
No, I would,
That's what you're
they would have that statement,
Right.
I'd probably read it, depending on whether the School Boards Association approves it. If they don't approve it, then I have to introduce it from the body. So, which, and, you know, that's what happened. Then what I did last year was I kind of then elaborated on more explicitly on why I support it. So I said more than this. I would read it and then I'd say more than this.
So I would, and you know, I've not been to how that board functions, but I would really introduce it with a statement of really what is going on. And that statement, I mean, while we were talking, I jotted down some things, but if it's appropriate, I would really say why, you know, rather than flat saying, you know, we harden our buildings, but not, I would talk about just the crisis in our country. And it's not just our schools. And then we bring it to the level of schools because that's the only thing we're asking to control. But I would really make a statement that really hits home because it could be our school tomorrow, or it could be Goffstown tomorrow. And I think if we take all emotion out of the statement, it becomes more of a technical decision and maybe more along the legal grounds. And I really think we should appeal to emotion. And because I think that's what we're living, that we're living with kids going to school in fear, we're living with kids doing active shooter drills, we're living with parents. Every single political event I've gone to, the question has come up asking the candidate, what are you going to do about school shootings? And I think we should be really hard-nosed about this and bring it forward in that kind of way. So I would want a much stronger statement that really emphasized this is an incredible public health issue.
So Mike, I'm still coming back. So the federal gun-free School Zone Act, in there, the asterisk is if you have a concealed weapon permit, you can carry the weapon onto the school grounds. So my question, if we're clarifying, when we say, by saying restrict, are we saying we want state law to mirror federal law? That's what we're asking, right? We're not asking to exceed it. We're saying in order to carry a gun into our schools, you have to have a concealed weapon permit, right?
I think Tom's intent was to be more general and just get the School Board Association on record as supporting something.
Right. So,
Is that?
Yeah, I think that you starts, the more you start getting into the technicalities of it, you know, you get in.
But people are going to ask, what do you mean?
Yeah, but that's what happened last year, is what you're saying. By getting too technical, it kind of got lost, like the whole.
I think so.
That's not that, I mean, that's, you're saying you want the state, you're saying exactly what you want. You want the state law to mirror the federal law.
But my understanding of the situation is if somebody legally has a gun in the state, because there's no special permit.
Exactly.
Yeah, they eliminated.
So if you legally have a gun, you can bring it into the school.
Right.
Period.
But what we're saying is we want the state, and actually what we're asking at the very least, is the state to reinstitute a concealed weapon permit and not be open carry. That's what we're asking, right?
No.
No, because open carry is bigger, I mean, that covers a lot more other things.
I'm saying, again, when you look at the federal law is in order to carry a gun into a school, you have to have a concealed weapon permit. In New Hampshire, since we did away with a concealed weapon permit, therefore anyone can bring a gun into the school. So
You didn't do away with the permit. You did away with the
requirement. So we're asking for the requirement to be reinstated to mirror federal law, which is the federal gun-free law. And that's what we're at. I'm trying to clarify it for myself. That's exactly what, I mean, what are we exactly asking?
So I'll take a shot at it. I think what Tom is trying to say is that local school boards would have the authority to limit the possession of guns on school property. Notwithstanding state or federal law, that as a local school board, you could say this is a gun-free zone.
That would be one possibility. The other possibility would be the state would decide they're going to bring the state law in conformity with certainly the intent of the gun-free school zone. And they had two, those are the two options that they had last year.
Right, I remember.
So those would be the two possibilities that I would see.
And my question, Brian, where you've been a police officer, is authorized personnel only. Should that be specific to trained police officers?
They're exempt of any restrictions for firearms in the state.
But that's who we would want to be carrying a weapon on our school
Right, but the
property.
law's already clear on they can bring their weapon.
So should it say limited to to police, trained police officers?
Well, I think it's already addressed in the general laws of the state.
I know, but I was saying referencing that, so we're clear that it isn't somebody who has a concealed weapon permit, it isn't somebody who carries a gun, it's a trained police officer.
Certified police officer.
Certified police officer, limited to certified police officer, Tom?
Instead of authorized personnel?
Instead of authorized personnel.
Instead of authorized.
Is that clearer?
Yeah.
Because that references
Limited possession to authorized personnel, what do you want it to say?
certified police officer.
Certified police officer.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
And my thought is, in some states, this language, in Texas, there are communities, for example, where the superintendent can authorize teachers to carry guns. Mm-hmm. And so just by saying certified police officer, you're taking away the option, which I would be glad to see not on the table, of a school board authorizing a teacher to carry a gun in the state of New Hampshire, which under the way the current law is being interpreted, I don't know that there's any restriction to that.
Okay.
So as an example, just to give you a sense of it, you know, our SRO is in full uniform, and he is wearing his weapon, as he should be, because he is a police officer. So last night, when we had the open house, it was interesting because Tommy's tall and he stands out and he's in uniform. A number of parents actually asked him, do you wear that in school? And he said, yes, I'm required to. And it didn't get into a belated conversation or a lengthy conversation. Tommy presents himself very professionally, and they said, oh. And then they talked to Jay about it later, and he said, yes, that is a fact, because that's his job, and he's required to wear his gun when he's in uniform. And parents were very accepting of that. But I think in the past, we've had our SRO in cities or street clothes, and it wasn't as obvious that she was carrying a gun. When Tommy was in full uniform last night, clearly he was in full uniform. And that was the first time I've had a question about a police officer with a gun in a school setting since I've been here, and it was because he was in full uniform. But the difference is Tommy's trained to, knows how to use that weapon. It's there for safety reasons and not for any other reason, and we can predict that he would use it to protect the school as opposed to someone who's coming in who we have no rationale or understanding of. So I think that this is really an important issue for our school board. Many school boards can't even have this conversation, which is why when we get to the state level, it becomes a big debate, because, guns in schools for us, collectively is like, of course, we don't want guns in schools. But other communities, this becomes a much more volatile conversation, and in many communities, it can't even be had. So, one of the things that I did from the last meeting is I presented it to the Southeast Superintendents Association, which is about 18 superintendents, and we had a number of superintendents who are waiting for our work here so they can bring it to their school boards. So there is interest, just like there was last year, in supporting us in this position. So I do think it's an important position. I think it's scary that the state and federal law aren't in compliance, and it makes people nervous. And there's really no reason for any gun to be on school property other than that being possessed by a police officer.
So I guess I would be reluctant to bring in a lot more emotional language, although I think into this, because I think that's typically not how these are written. I do want to be accurate, but I think if you get into some of the technicality, I think the bottom line is, as I understand, is if you own a gun in the state, legally own a gun, correct me if I'm wrong, if you legally own a gun in the state of New Hampshire, you can bring that gun into a school. Schools cannot restrict somebody bringing in the gun.
No, because they're reversed to federal law.
What?
Federal law states you have to be duly licensed in your state, which means you have to have a permit in the state, and then you are legally obligated. Now, by law, we have, as a school district, can say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you entrance to the school with that weapon.
That's not my understanding.
We would be in trouble if we did that, because they could sue us or.
Because there's a law that says schools cannot restrict.
Yeah.
There's also a law that says the superintendent, I believe it's the law states superintendent has the ability to give exceptions and not give exceptions.
Yeah, the way that it would fall on me is if, we'll say that somebody came into the high school and Suzanne called me and she was concerned, I would deem it a safety concern. And then I could call the local police and say, I have a safety concern. Chief Kurz would come, or one of his officers would come, he'd express that the school has expressed a safety concern and we'd ask you to leave.
But this person could say, look, it's my right to come.
And then it, becomes that Donnybrook of language back and forth. But the chief has assured me that if I deem a safety concern, he'll come and address it. But that puts every chief in the state in the same predicament that every superintendent would be in the situation of deeming something a safety concern and then dealing with it on an individual basis as opposed to a statewide position.
My only concern would be the wording, and if you just throw in by New Hampshire state law, I think it would suffice because.
Instead of by New Hampshire?
Under current law.
Under current law.
By New Hampshire state law.
I think you probably, I just don't want someone to start.
I see,
poking
okay.
holes in your statement saying that's not entirely true.
Because the federal law.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, I think that's a good,
So instead of.
I think that's all.
would that satisfy?
Yes.
Okay,
New Hampshire state law.
Under New Hampshire state law?
yeah,
Thank you.
okay, yeah, thanks, Brian. So I guess, personally, I think the certified language, was it certified police officer?
Yeah.
Instead of authorized personnel, I think that restricts it in a better way, so, and I think under New Hampshire state law, that's a clarification. So I'm wondering if I could go ahead with this. And I think rather than bringing in too much of the crisis in our country, I think people know that. I think that's the subtext of it anyway. So I prefer not to bring that in. I think the more you bring in, then the more people can kind of push against it. So this, I think, is the bare bones of it. So I guess I'll make the motion with those two additions, whether we can vote to go ahead with this. So I move to go ahead with those two additions, okay?
And I'll second that.
Okay, second by Denise. We okay?
My only concern with that is that I think that makes this more restrictive even than federal law, the proposal. And getting into that level of detail, I wonder if we have less of a chance of success.
Why is this more restrictive? I'm sorry, say that.
Well, maybe I misunderstood all of the changes, but if we are saying that, if we're saying restrict possession of firearms on school property to certified police officers only, that is more restrictive.
That's a higher standard than the federal law.
Because permitted gun owners are allowed to bring weapons onto school property under the Gun-Free School Zones Act.
But
to Brian's point.
each state can regulate that, just like you go to you can't just walk into Massachusetts with a gun like you can in New Hampshire. You go down there, you're in jail.
I guess I'm just thinking about the practical chance of success. I'd rather see something rather than nothing.
I agree.
That's the same argument you're making with the restrict possession. You're going vague because you're looking for something. What I would love us to mirror the federal Gun-Free Law Act. Would I settle for us having local control? Yeah, it's better than nothing. So, again, that's what it's the same argument that Michael's making by just saying authorized personnel. Whatever.
Would you mind reading the current draft or the current?
Well, there's only two changes. You mean the whole thing?
Well, is it just the certified police officers and New Hampshire state law?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those would be the
I wasn't
change.
sure I was following all of that.
Well, I think, like the authorized personnel only, that got into kind of a squishy area, like, could we authorize the principal to carry a gun? Could we authorize, teachers who are trained to bring a gun in? And so that it starts getting a slippery slope, I think.
I think we already have a policy on that anyway.
What?
We do have a policy.
We have a policy, but whether other schools wouldn't, So are we okay to go with it? So I guess I make the motion, I maybe already made it, to approve this with those two changes. And did you second it, Denise?
Yeah.
Okay. Are we okay to vote? All in favor, raise your hand. 6 in favor, all those opposed? Abstention?
I'm going to abstain. And
Kenny's abstaining.
You abstain, Kenny?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think in the future, again, instead of having something in our folder the night of a meeting, it's so helpful. It's a recurrent theme to let's get it in the backup earlier.
It wasn't the backup.
This
This
was
was
backup.
But I didn't,
It was.
so it wasn't in the public backup?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I didn't
it
see.
was, yeah, I can show you. Yeah, the exact same thing was in there. It was
Well, then
looked on
I'm
resolution
sorry.
proposal
Number
under
eight.
number 8.
Number 8.
Does that change your vote, Ken?
No.
Okay.
Because I think we're going down the same path by
Rabbit hole.
introducing the same thing without changing tactic.
Number 8, see?
No, but in the backup that goes out to the community at large, this wasn't in it.
Oversight.
And I
then.
find it much easier to read that, so it wasn't in that.
Oh, okay.
So we have a coach's nomination. Motion to approve the Oyster River Middle School stipend activity advisor.
I'll make that motion.
Denise, moved by Denise, second by Brian. Discussion? All in favor, raise your hands. 7 in favor, the student rep in favor, those are approved. Policies, Denise, you want to take this?
Yes, if I can find my notes. Okay, so, the drug-free workplace, let's see. Yeah, so we looked at both the current version and the New Hampshire School Board Association version. And we decided to keep the existing language from the current policy. We just tweaked it a little bit for that particular policy. Then superintendent relationships, that was the one that we actually liked the New Hampshire School Board Association version better. They were very, very similar, but we just thought, we kind of we thought it was a little cleaner, so that's the New Hampshire School Board Association version. I'd like to start actually with those policies because I have another comment about the deletion, so I'd like to keep that separate. So I'd like to make a motion for first read for policy ADD, drug-free workplace, drug-free schools, BDD, board superintendent relationship.
Okay.
I'd like to ask that we separate those.
All right, separate them out even further? Okay, so
Take them individually?
all right, so I'll withdraw that, and I'll just make a motion to approve ADB, drug-free workplace, drug-free schools for first read.
Moved by Denise, is there a second? Second by Brian. Okay.
There's no provision in this for random or reasonable suspicion drug testing except for bus drivers. Is that intended?
It's a law. The law.
There's no reasonable suspicion. We can't request a drug test because of based on reasonable suspicion for anybody except for bus driver.
No, if I suspected a teacher, I would remove them from the classroom temporarily on administrative leave and make that a condition of them coming back. But there's no law that governs that. That's the teacher contract.
Okay, so that's not captured in policy anywhere right now?
No.
Okay. I guess I would ask if it should be. And then in the last paragraph of section B.
I'm sorry, was that B or D?
B, bravo.
Okay.
This refers to other board policies, but it doesn't say which other policies, and there's not anything else referenced except for the bus driver policy. So this is about discipline, and I think I know which policy it's referring to. I think it's the R of GDR, but I'm not sure. And that GDR was last updated in 1991. So it might be time to review that if that's where we're pointing
What paragraph are you in? Because I'm not seeing that.
Here.
Page 2 of 2.
You said D, Michael?
The last paragraph of B, let's see, where is it?
School board policy, oh, policies.
Yeah, so we talk about school board policies. I'm not sure which policies we're pointing to there. And they're not cross-referenced.
They're not cross-referenced, the only one is the EEA.
Which is the bus driver
Right.
policy. And the only one I could figure out that it might be referencing hasn't been touched since 1991. So.
And what policy is that, Michael?
GDR-R.
GBR?
Sorry, GDR.
How could a policy not be updated?
Well, it's a R, it's a procedure, so.
Well, if it's something else, I couldn't figure out what it was pointing to, so.
Okay.
So I think adding those references might be important. And then in the last section, section D as in dog, it does say that the superintendent will perform a biennial review, which I think is a really good idea. I think we should just add one more statement that the superintendent, that review should be delivered to the school board. So I've got those comments. I could make them, refine them out into text, or we could ask the policy committee to take a look at it, or you can disagree with me.
I think in the first read, we just send it back to the policy committee, Michael, and we'll work on it.
So could we vote on a first read, and then you could come back with those possible changes? Is that okay?
I'm happy with that.
Yeah. Other comments about this policy? Hearing none, could we have a vote on approval for first read? All those in favor, please raise your hands. 7 in favor, the student rep in favor. Okay.
Who was the second on that? Denise?
Brian.
Brian.
Yeah, I made the motion.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, Denise, the next one is.
All right, so
the
I'll make
school-
a motion, policy BDD, board superintendent relationship for first read.
Moved by Denise, second by Brian. Questions?
Who was the second?
Brian.
Okay.
Seems like a simplistic description, but
Yeah, this is, we looked at the New Hampshire School Board Association, we said, yeah, that's it, right there, so we thought it was fine as it was presented.
Ready to vote? First read? All in favor, please raise your hand. 7 in favor, the student rep in favor. Okay. And you said you want to talk about the deletion?
Yeah, the only hesitation for deletion is that we are still in the process of modifying the R, which I know we don't approve the R officially, but we did spend quite a bit of time talking about the R document that goes along with the student district placement. And to me, it would be premature to delete this policy until we have that R worked out.
Okay.
So that's my only, so I just think we should wait until we have that worked out and then bring it back.
Okay. If there's no motion on it, we don't have to do anything. Dan?
Can I just ask a question on the, in the minutes, last paragraph, there's mention of a conversation regarding a complaint pertaining to a banner displayed on the athletic field. Is there any, what's the gist of that?
We had a complaint from a parent that one of the banners that is sponsored on the field was by a church. And so Todd and Andy brought it to me, and I said, the banners are strictly the name of the company, or in this case, the name of the church. And when you sell banners, you're not selling slogans or positions, you're just selling that placement for that time period. First Amendment allows churches to display their banner just like a company or a nonprofit displays their banner. Just to be sure, we did call our attorney, and our attorney said absolutely. He said it's either you are or you're not. It's an on-off switch. So if we were uncomfortable that churches would buy banners, and then recently we had another church buy a banner, then we would have to just simply say we're not selling banners to anyone. So there's no in-between. Your policy is pretty clear in relation to what can't be purchased, like, things that would be disruptive to a school environment, that kind of thing. But when it comes to the simple banners and they're not disruptive, then we really don't have a position to say no to anyone.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Okay.
Michael has a question.
Not about that, but about the deletion that Denise was discussing. So so the new procedure that you're working on is related to student placement. That's, can be a very sensitive topic. And I don't know what the content of that proposed procedure is, but I think we should look very critically if that's really a procedure, if that needs to be policy.
It will be a procedure that we'll share with you like we normally do when we think it's a hot button issue. But what we currently have is a policy that's not in compliance with board position and decisions that the superintendent and the team have made in relation to board position. And so we've taken that, our document, and made it consistent, but we're still working on it in policy, and when it's done, you know, policy has seen it, and I needed their feedback, and I'll bring it to the board for your feedback. Even if you're not adopting it, you need to see what we're doing.
Okay.
So we're not, so you say postpone deletion?
Right, yeah.
Okay, so there's no motion, so we don't have to do anything, and it remains intact. Is that okay? That handles most of our business, and we have school board committee updates. Manifest committee met and went through the manifest. Denise?
Long Range Planning Committee met last Monday, I believe, and we reviewed the numbers, the opening day enrollment compared to the Long Range Planning predictions. If you look at the total, it's really, really close. We're up by 5 students total in district. Obviously, there were some areas such as kindergarten where the numbers were, you know, more significantly, a little more significantly off. But we talked about, again, ways to kind of tweak the formulas that are used. We talked about, we did have real estate agent, Nada, I forget her last name. Kane, thank you. Come and talk about real estate sales, because we keep looking at whether that can help in terms of predicting the enrollment. And property sales were down, well, they're down so far this year, but what she told us was that there are more rentals. And so because it's a very, very tight market, and there aren't as many homes for sale, she said that there are a lot more people moving into rentals, some temporary until they can find a home to buy. And those rentals are opened up owing to students now going into like Madbury Commons and some of those other apartment complexes. So that was kind of interesting. We did talk about the impact of Riverwoods. Once Riverwoods opens up, it's going to definitely have a lot more homes on the market, which of course will mean, you know, more families moving into them. And there is some incentives that Riverwoods is giving people to sell their homes quickly. There's some financial incentives to do that. So it was an interesting discussion. Finally, the last thing I want to say is that there are openings. There's an opening for a Durham rep and one from Lee. And very sadly, Lisa Allison, this is probably going to be her last year doing
Major loss.
as chairing this committee, which she has done for a long, long, long time. So that's going to be some pretty tough shoes to fill. But in the meantime, we do have an opening for a Durham rep and a Lee rep. So if anyone knows of anyone who would be interested, they can let probably Dr. Morse know. And
Denise, I had a thought while you were talking that we haven't discussed before in relation to long-range planning. So we've had a couple of pretty significant developments in Lee.
Yes.
One is now completely done, and the other one is well on its way. And rather than living off a statistical model, we could actually, through the bus, the transportation, tell us, you know, if there's 36 houses, how many kids ended up living in those houses? That could give us a better sense of what's happening in terms of these developments, because my sense is that the development on Hayes Road, and is it Daniel Drive, is that the right one? So it's Daniel Drive, because of the number of requests I'm getting, my house isn't going to be done until September 23rd, can we start the school year with you kind of request. It does seem to me that these developments have more children in them than a statistical model would predict. So I could get those numbers if you think it would be helpful.
Yeah, I mean,
talk to Lisa and see
my
what-
understanding is the committee has, over the years, tried to incorporate real estate sales basically into the model.
But the sales won't
And-
necessarily tell you whether there's children in them, but the
Exactly.
transportation department could tell you that.
Yeah.
So every new house that Lisa has picked up on her route, or a particular development like Daniels Drive or the Hayes Road development, we know exactly how many kids are living in those developments because we're picking them up, unless they're preschoolers and they're not part of PEP.
It'd be pretty easy to just get all of the building permit history for all 3 towns for the last 3 years and then look at how many we are serving as students.
Yeah. Because my sense is, you look at a statistical model and, it says you're going to have like 1.2 kids per family. And, based on what I'm experiencing in terms of these calls, it seems like there's 2 and 3 kids that are coming into these homes, but might be my perception. And once Lisa looks at that for us, we might discover that it's 1.2 kids.
And again, the model that is currently used doesn't even take that into consideration
Right.
because it's never been a predictor. Like, I guess they've tried to do that and it's never been, believe it or not, you'd think it would be an accurate predictor, but apparently it hasn't.
Well, why didn't you raise it with Lisa? And if it's not worth doing, then we certainly
Yeah,
won't waste the energy. But
yeah.
if she thinks it's something that would be interesting for us to pursue, we'd be glad to.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely bring it up. At the next meeting is October 23rd, I want to say. But the model currently just basically is on births, and then there's a progression ratio kind of thing that they do to predict, the increase in students each.
She does get the in-migration pretty well.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look, it is pretty impressive when you look at the overall numbers because the 2,000, whatever it is, I mean, really the committee was off by 5 students total district-wide. So that's, pretty impressive that means less than 1% error rate for overall. It's just particular grades that, this one's a little higher, this one's a little lower kind of thing.
Can I ask you a question with the rental? You're saying people are grabbing rentals in the neighborhoods. That's what you're talking about?
Yes.
Because you can't,
Exactly.
you can't trying to grab a rental in the downtown
Right.
area.
No.
You can't do because they rent per bed.
Right.
So it's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, so what was explained was that because the students are now moving into like the Madbury Commons and all the downtown apartments, that houses that were traditionally student rentals are now being rented out by families, is what she said kind of informally. She didn't have specific statistics about that. It was more just a discussion based on her observations. But it was an interesting discussion, just to kind of talk about, what she sees.
What's that?
Are you seeing that?
Well, it's a really interesting, we've, on the Durham side, had a real conversation about what we call the missing middle. So there's a lack. One of the trends in New Hampshire is that we're having difficulty retaining young people. And so in Durham itself, our market really splits to 2 extremes. We have undergraduate housing, and as I mentioned, undergraduate housing is rented per bed. Right. So if you go in the downtown area, like for example, Madbury Commons that you mentioned, it's a 4-bedroom pod. Each one of those bedrooms in that pod rents for $900 a month. So a family cannot afford to move into that area. Right. And then the flip side of that is that we have single-family housing. Right. And in workforce housing, the definition of workforce housing would be that it's 100% of the median income. So in Durham, that's a $352,000 house is supposed to be a starter home for somebody young. And so we just don't have the housing stock to accommodate younger families coming into our community anymore.
Right. And part of what she was saying is that because a lot of the homes that the folks who will be moving into Riverwoods are older homes, and so they will be a little bit more affordable. She said, there'd be more homes in that range. And there's 150 independent living units at Riverwoods, so that's a lot. Not everyone is coming from just our community because people are coming in from elsewhere, but she was saying that that's going to definitely open up some housing.
Yeah, I mean, so the Riverwoods, since I've toured it and talked to them a lot, so a starting unit
at Riverwoods, the basic cost is $4,500 per month with $450,000 that you have to put down to start with. So, and it goes up to over $8,500 per month.
$8,500 a month?
A month, with... in addition to putting down a half... In addition, well, the $8,500, you have to put down $850,000 you're putting down. So that allows you to stay in Riverwoods as you move from that apartment to like more extended care, assisted living.
Is that per person?
No.
No, the couple is, it's for the apartment.
I'm sorry.
They've gone with them.
I don't want to,
I'm sorry.
I think we're getting off a little bit from
The number though for Durham, it's like 35% occupancy of Riverwoods is going to be Durham families. So that tells you how many houses we're going.
I had a question about Orchard Drive. Has that, my understanding that had been approved by the town council before we could go ahead. And do you know where that stands?
We did, didn't we? We had to accept the funds that were raised. And
Okay, so there's no obstacle to signing, is there?
It's not total that you're having. You have a public hearing?
Yeah, right. We have a public hearing, right? We move to accept it. We have to go through public hearing kind of scenario. We've worked out the language with UNH about the right-of-way, and so all that is on board. But the funds are there, we just have to go through the process.
So you go through a public hearing, and after the public hearing, then we can do the transfer.
Then the town council then votes again after the public hearing, and then
Okay, good. So it's sometime in October.
And I have a committee one too. It's like, so we had like right before this, we had the first of the sustainability committees for this year. The sustainability, according to the strategic plan, it's transitioning from using a single sustainability coordinator to try to use staff at building level. And so they reached out to staff to see who's interested in doing that. And they, we already had one person who's on the committee at Mohammed, but they have 5 new teachers that are interested. So 2 at the high school, 2 at the middle school, 1 at Mohammed, and 1 at Mastway. They also talked about what they're trying to accomplish for the year. One of the things that came up was which is kind of late, recommendations for the 2021 fiscal budget that had to do with sustainability, a review of sustainability policy and procedure, and then a review of the responsibilities of the sustainability coordinator. They suggested to try to break up some of the work into working groups. And so the working groups, one was parent outreach, which is to try to educate parents about what's going on. A community outreach to try to keep the district and towns informed about what the year's goals and objectives are. My strong suggestion to them was that they also try to align the district goals with the town goals, because right now you have no idea if they are or what they are. One other working group was scholarships and awards, working with the liaison with the high school counseling to raise money, and then recruiting interns, and then finally somebody to do the policy and procedure. The next meeting is November 6th.
Okay, thank you. Other committee updates? Public comment?
Hi, I'm Dean Rubine from Lee. Good to see everybody. I'll just make a couple of remarks on the budget goal. Michael's sort of right about the difference between the number and the percent on the fund balance. If there's no additional money, that goes up to the taxpayers. The way I like to think about it is the budget is basically a pizza with 9 slices. Durham pays 4, Lee pays 2, Madbury pays 1, and the state adequacy fund pays 2. So it's basically, that ratio would be about 9/7 of the difference between the percentage on the one. But that would only be the case if that state money didn't increase every year. But it usually increases, which is why when we raise a little bit and they raise a little bit, it sort of goes together. So it's really only the amount above the part of that 3.5% above what the state increases that gets 100% to the taxpayers, if that makes any sense. The other part is the change in the wording. My problem with it was I liked it before. You were talking about tax impact, which in my mind was essentially the amount we were asking of the taxpayers before the state adequacy money is taken into account. So it's basically the amount the district really controls. And it includes the revenue we get and, the budget, obviously. And I thought the 3.5% referred to that. And that was a good number. It's a number that makes, it's the amount the district is asking of the taxpayers. But when you reworded it, you took out the revenue part. So now we're just back where we were back in the old days, where we're just looking in the growth of Fund 10, and I think that's less transparent. You didn't do it, but the table motion said that. So I don't like the change in wording. Okay, that's all I got.
Thank you, Dean. One comment? Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Bevy Cadle from Madbury. Didn't realize I'd be back here up front so soon. But when I was here last, I mentioned I'm usually stuck in the boiler room trying to make all these engines work. And I wanted to come here and thank you for what you've done for my son and the service dog. But I wasn't kidding. I really was stuck in the boiler room. Catherine can attest to it. Earlier this year, there was a couple times, I think 3 times, 2 of which I was in the maintenance room because there was no school nurse. So, for my son that is at a skilled level type of care, he's not at the Durham place you guys are talking about, but with his electronic equipment, he probably wouldn't be safely allowed on school grounds without a school nurse or without a parent in the maintenance closet. So I was grateful that he could be part of the school day those 2 days. But then I found myself in DC pushing for something for special needs and got that call that the nurse couldn't come in. My ex, the father of the kids, he really couldn't leave work. We leave work so much as it is, attending to his care. But they worked something out remotely that someone could push the buttons. Now, yeah, sure, we all know how to work pagers. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But just pushing buttons isn't good enough, because if John went into a low, and if you know John, if you've met John, he's a crazy athletic kid. He very spontaneous, impulsive. He doesn't feel pain per se. So if John went into a low for like 15 minutes, that could be that. Us working remotely that day to help out the school got John in school, but it doesn't really mean John's safe. So I was very surprised that some here may not have known. Some of us are actually going to the school, working out of a maintenance closet. We don't even have Wi-Fi to do our own work because Wi-Fi it drops you often if you're a public person. But I was surprised that you guys didn't realize what's going on the ground level. So I would say those that know us, I think, would support making sure John gets a fair and appropriate education by having this backup nurse available, whether it's for my son John or for another kid, so that they can attend school. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Other public comment? Closing actions, your future meetings are down there. There's no non-public, there's no non-meeting, so could I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Moved by Michael, second by Al. All those, raise your hand. All those in favor? 7 in favor. Student rep in favor. The meeting's adjourned.